hold space for the most marginalized. So we can think about that when contributing to the conversation. If you're somebody who's not directly affected by something, it's good to hold space for those who are. And tonight we will not be trying to disprove the existence of racism or oppression. We will be speaking particularly from an anti-racist perspective of dismantling anti-Black racism. So we'll get more into that a little bit later. And if you have other ideas for ground rules for the conversation, you can add them to the chat and we will highlight them and we can move forward with the slide.
My dog is whining, sorry. Okay, so, shh, I'll play with you later. Okay, here you go. So what is race? Race is a social construct, so it's constructed for the purpose of society. In the 18th century, anthropologists and philosophers created and used the false idea of races to place people into different racial categories. This came to indicate certain racial types based on physicality mostly. Shh, that's enough, please. So this means that generationally race became inherited, right? This flawed idea of race provides the right condition for the belief that some races are inherently superior to others. And this then creates a global power balance. Enough. Sorry, one sec. To find an inappropriate toy to keep her busy. This creates a global power imbalance, right? That greatly benefits white people and white supremacy. And this is shown in the form of slavery and colonialism. While race is a social construct, racism is real. And when people identify as Black, they should be believed. It's about them presenting themselves and preserving who they are, and it helps towards liberation. So we can go to the next slide. So anti-Black racism is another term that you're seeing often. And it encompasses deeply embedded beliefs and attitudes that consistently lead to discriminatory prejudice that directed at Black people and people of African descent. So through the distinctive experience of colonization and enslavement, these beliefs are so embedded in Canadian institutions, policies, practices, that they're integral parts of our systems. So as you can see in the slide, there are different elements to anti-Black racism. There's the systemic, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. So internalized is what we end up believing about ourselves and about other people. Interpersonal is about how we treat each other and how we view each other as a whole. Institutional is, it's it's about the policies and practices that organizations and institutions follow that enable anti-Black racism to continue to thrive. And then there's systemic. So it's the ongoing racial inequalities that are maintained within society. And so what ends up happening is that all of these things that you see around the circle are affected, right? Okay, we can go to the next slide. Colonialism. One sec. My computer's freezing. Okay. So colonialism can be viewed in two parts. There's settler colonialism, and it's really the aggressive theft of lands from Indigenous peoples. And we're speaking globally, right? Settlers would displace and use violence and force to ensure that settlers outnumbered Indigenous populations around the world, including Canada. The second part being exploitation colonialism. So that's the institutional and economic policies that focus on conquering a country, while the sole goal um, is really to manipulate that land's resources, the natural resources, which include enslaved people and goods for the purpose of creating new worlds and economic prowess. So how can this be seen today? There's still over 900 reserves that exist in Canada. We hear all the time on the news about water quality and rates of health and suicide amongst those on reservations and amongst the populations. So we know that colonialism is very active and not limited to the North. Um, I'd like to know if you guys can give some examples of how colonialism still exists today in the chat. If you have any ideas, please put them through as we move on. Okay, I'll give you guys a minute to maybe just think. Oh, I love the fur babies too. Yeah, so high incarceration rates of Black and Indigenous people, that's definitely one. You could say pay rates among whites and non-whites. Yeah, resource extraction without affirmative consent, definitely. Thinking about appropriation and knowledge, worldview, arts. Brianna wrote, disproportionate rates of Black and Indigenous children who are apprehended. Yep, extension of the 60s scoop. Oh, thanks. Yeah, the Afropunk quote was dope. Access to property, definitely. Pipelines through unceded territorial land, commodification of other cultures, refusing to acknowledge land rights, disproportionate number of senior leaders in the workplace, child welfare, believing white is the norm. Yeah, you guys got it. Oh, well, this is great that we have this knowledge now, and you know that you guys are all here. This is awesome. It's also quite heavy, but okay. So let's, oopsie. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. And we're going to talk about oppression. Oops. Ah, oh no, I've lost you all. Okay, so I'm going to read these quotes because they're really good. So we've got an Afropunk quote that is, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And a Beyonce quote, no more seeing people of color as less than human. And a Bell Hooks quote, being oppressed means the absence of choice. So oppression is the combination of institutionalized racism, discrimination, the cruel exercise of authority or power that then creates systems that regularly and severely discriminates against specific people and groups. These groups include those that are non-white, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So, sorry, let me get you guys back here. Okay, next slide. Move on to systemic racism. So Beverly Blaine, who's a professor of women and gender studies in the Department of Historical Studies at U of T, Mississauga. I pulled a quote from her and it reads, it's actually a material reality. It's not that you don't like me because I'm Black. It's not liking me because I'm Black. Actually, you not liking me because I'm Black actually gets in the way of my survival. Police not liking Black people means Black people get killed by police. And then I've got another quote here from Tiffany Ford, who's a former TDSB trustee, entrepreneur, and activist. And it reads, taking land away from Indigenous people across all of Americas and then bringing in free labor from Africa and enslaving Black people created wealth and opportunity for white people. And I would say that those opportunities are still felt today by most. Sorry, I'm having such a hard time with my screen. Okay, so systemic racism is racism at every level, right? It's upholding systems and institutions of white supremacy. This permeates structural operations like we saw on the other slide and more, education, healthcare, food security, access, judicial, policing, criminal systems. I keep losing everyone. Okay. We can move on to the next slide. All right, like that there's some other notes in the chat, like other ways that we know colonialism exists today. Kitty's team writes, history is taught in schools as it's taught now, yeah. The Oprah representation of Black students in special education, that's huge. Okay, so move on to slavery. Enslaved people are considered species of property. So the creation of the idea of race really paved the way for people to be dehumanized at extreme levels. Enslaved people belonged to someone else and are objects of the law and state rather than subjects, right? The institution of slavery really established the idea that Black people are not part of the law and they don't deserve protection. So, for example, if Black people use self-defense or self-preservation as a defense, most of the times in court, they will always lose, right? Almost always.
They seem to
Slave persons have been denied basic rights, the ability to move independently or geographically, and are restricted in choices like who they can partner with, occupation, health needs, education, policing, criminal and judicial systems. And
that's a fake house there.
You know, the systems of establishment during the periods of enslavement
They have the pictures on
continue to manifest through the system of incarceration and its relationship with Black people. And we can move to the next one.
Okay, so thank you so much. So what Nauda has done here has introduced a lot of the key terminology and concepts that help us to form an understanding of what racism and anti-Black racism look like in Canada. So that terminology is terminology that we will share with our children and figure out together how to filter down in order to make it accessible and in order to create an environment where we can have safe and honest conversations. So in terms of understanding the backdrop of what's experienced in terms of people living in Canada, we're gonna start using those terms that Nauda went through to deconstruct this idea of the myth of the Great Free North. So we'll start by talking about when we're in school in Canada, what do we typically learn about Blackness in school? So if you learned anything about Blackness in school in Canada, if you went to school here, you had that privilege, maybe you could call it that, write down what it is that you wrote in the chat. What it is that you learned about Blackness in school in the chat. Okay, so first Two people are saying the Underground Railroad, Underground Railroad, Underground Railroad, nothing, slavery, nothing, nothing. So that pretty much actually sums it up. Typically, when we do learn about Blackness in Canada, the Underground Railroad is a hugely emphasized story. Afua Cooper explains that the Underground Railroad is a triumphant story that makes Americans look bad and makes Canada look great. So when the Confederacy was written, the history of enslavement here in Canada was de-emphasized. And this was done to make Black suffering invisible and to make Canada look like a multicultural safe haven where power is equally shared, which allows for white supremacy here to continue and serves to quell movements of resistance. So we can move on to the next slide. Went to school in the States, says Ariel, and slavery was a big topic. Exactly. So Canada really has a tendency to hide its history of enslavement, whereas in the United States, it is revealed and almost, I would say, emphasized. So despite that myth, there was enslavement here in Canada. Here is an artwork by Kit Lang, and it's a depiction of Marie-Joseph Angelique. And owning slaves, or I say enslaved people, because nobody's actually born to be a slave. Owning enslaved people was common in Canada and not just reserved for the elite. This is written by in Natasha Henry's research. And Canada also had slavery for more than 2 centuries, ending only 30 years before US President Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. When Britain took over New France, about 7% of the colony was enslaved, or around 4,000 people out of a population of 60,000. 2/3 of these were indigenous enslaved people, and the other third was African. And African enslaved people cost twice as much and were a status symbol. And the British did not set them free. Unlike our American cousins, Canada did not itself end slavery. In fact, in 1777, enslaved people began fleeing Canada for Vermont. So when we hear about this idea of the Underground Railroad, that's often not something that's talked about, that this Underground Railroad actually went both ways and people fled Canada to the United States, which had already abolished enslavement. And it took Britain years longer to finally outlaw this practice in 1834. This means not only did Canada have enslavement, but it lasted longer here and was brutal, as most enslaved Black people in Canada were Black women doing domestic work. Black women doing domestic work in Canada faced not only physical, but also sexual and emotional violence. And in fact, like I said, the Underground Railroad went not only from the south to the north, but also from Canada to the US. So here in this picture is Marie-Joseph Angelique, and Afua Cooper writes about her in The Hanging of Angelique. She's a Black woman who was enslaved in Montreal, and she practiced resistance daily because of the violence of her white masters. Her masters regularly beat and injured her. According to Afua Cooper, Marie-Joseph Angelique requested freedom from her mistress in 1733. When her mistress refused, Angelique threatened her owner. She was then sold to François Etienne Cugney. There, Angelique would often refuse tasks as a form of resistance. So often when we talk to kids about racism, we talk to them about this idea that at every point in history where Black people are oppressed, Black people were also resisting and fighting back. That way, we get to be seen as agents who participate in transforming reality rather than just being subjected to oppression. So Angelique fought back often, and eventually Etienne Cugney threatened to sell her to the Caribbean. So at that point, she ran away, and she again threatened her master with burning their property. So soon after then, Her master's property did catch fire, and Marie-Joseph Angelique was accused of setting this fire. And she was tortured by the French and hanged in Montreal in June of 1734. So this is just one story of Canada's very brutal history of enslavement. So we'll go on. So remember, y'all, that you can feel free to ask questions in the chat anytime. You don't have to wait until the end. And I'm happy to stop and address any questions. So another story that I would like to share is that of Chloe Cooley. Chloe Cooley was a Black woman who was enslaved in Fort Erie, so now known as the Niagara region. And Chloe was brought to Fort Erie after the American Revolution, as Canada allowed loyalists to bring enslaved Black people into Canada as property. One day, Chloe was witnessed being forced into a boat to be sold across the river to a different owner. This incident actually led to a court case against her owner, Adam Vrooman, and is believed to have been the catalyst in the fight that eventually won the Act Against Slavery in Upper Canada in 1793. This act prevented enslaved people from being brought into the country and stipulated the gradual phasing out of slavery. So again, this is something that we'd like to emphasize when speaking to Black children and children in general. This idea that abolition was a movement that was led by Black people. We are the people who led movements fighting for our freedom. And it's important that they know and understand that, because it's important, it allows them to understand their power and their agency to resist. So somebody had said in the chat, can you refer to any respected texts on slavery in Canada? I would refer to the text by Afua Cooper, The Hanging of Angelique, which is a phenomenal text outlining the history of slavery in Canada, with many details not only on the story of Marie-Joseph Angelique, and also to the text by Robin Maynard, Policing Black Lives, which includes a lot of excellent information about the history of enslavement in Canada. Thanks for that question. And Alex asks, is enslavement more appropriate of a word to use than slavery? I tend to use the word enslavement more, because I tend to I don't refer to people as slaves, because I believe that it's part of the degradation and psychological warfare against our communities. None of us were slaves, because remember, the idea of slaves was built into what Neuda was laying the foundation to talk about in the beginning, when they were talking about this creation of the idea of races, this mythology around there being races, and one of those races being Negroids. And the mythology said that Negroids were created to enjoy enslavement, to enjoy this labor, and to do it happily. That's where we get like those very racist ideas of the minstrel shows and such. So I reject that idea that anybody is born to be a slave, and I instead refer to enslaved, which puts the emphasis on the people who were doing enslavement rather than on calling people slaves. So I think it's more appropriate, like not in a way where we need to worry about being PC, but in a way where we need to worry about the power dynamics and empowering people who are oppressed. So that's the story of Chloe Cooley. And it is one of the things, like I said, that was a catalyst to the Act Against Slavery in Upper Canada. So we can go on to the next one now. This is an interesting story that I came across in looking up some history here in Ontario. And it's become very pertinent again with the resurgence of the abolitionist movement now, or the movement to defund police and get rid of prisons. So now, as part of that movement, people have been bringing up this idea of getting rid of colonial monuments. And this figure of Henry Dundas has become an interesting point of conversation. So let us explore Henry Dundas. Henry Dundas was one of the figures who's celebrated in Ontario and who has inspired the names for Dundas Street in Toronto, in London, the Dundas suburb of Hamilton, Dundas Square, Dundas, the town. So who is Henry Dundas? Dundas was a minister in the government who in 1792 modified a famous abolitionist bill. So this bill was put forth by William Wilberforce and was supposed to end slavery. Dundas added the word gradually to the bill in order to actually prolong the suffering of thousands of enslaved people. And additionally, although this often isn't discussed along with the controversy, quote unquote, about Dundas, but additionally, Dundas was a minister of war and colonies in the late 1700s. Dundas was responsible for sending 40,000 troops to the Caribbean to expand British wealth. In 1795, evidence was brought forth that these troops committed atrocities against the Jamaican Maroons of Trelawney Town, who were independence fighters against enslavement in Jamaica. Dundas also sent troops to brutally suppress uprisings in Grenada, to expand slavery in St. Vincent, and to attempt to quell resistance in St. Domingue, which is presently known as Haiti. So thank you to the amazing Black scholar and professor Melanie Newton, who gathered this research. And I think it's very important in terms of understanding the ways that enslavement and colonization continues to be celebrated in our society. And that we need to question why these monuments are protected. And really resist against that ongoing celebration of colonialism. So we will go forward. There are many petitions that have circulated, by the way, about getting rid and renaming Dundas Street. People have actually suggested that we rename it to Chloe Cooley Street. Okay, and somebody would like me to repeat the name of the researcher, which was Melanie Newton. Okay, so the ongoing celebration of colonialism. This is something, obviously we cannot go through the entire history of colonization at this time. However, we will briefly talk about the Takaranto Purchase. So how this city where we are came to be known as Toronto. Before going forward with that, I just want to back up a minute. I had forgot to mention that on the note of Henry Dundas, this idea of observing with your children the names of streets and talking about why is this street called this? Who is this statue of this person? Why are they being celebrated? These are important everyday interruptions into the messaging that they're receiving on a daily basis without it being explicitly said as messaging. So that is a very helpful tool in deconstructing the world around them to question those things. Okay, so pushing forward to the sale of Takaranto. So we are going to talk about this as an example of the deceitful ways that the British acquired land to create Canada as a colony, and the deceitful and corrupt ways that Canada continues to interact with Indigenous people. An overview of the Toronto Purchase. I'm going to put quotation marks, as my kids love to do, the bunny ears. So 1787, Sir John Johnson gives the Mississaugas of the New Credits blankets, kettles, and gunpowder, and later claims they were payment for the land. He later produces a questionable and not legally binding deed on which chief signatures had been transferred from one document to this sale document. So this is something, the sale of Takaranto, that we have actually act it out with our students in Freedom School so they can see how the sale transpired and talk about what they think about it. So imagine that, the giving of blankets, kettles, and gunpowder as gifts, and then later saying this was payment for the land. So in 1788, Alexander Atkin attempted to survey the land, but was told by the Mississaugas of the New Credit that they had not ceded any territory as far east as the Don River or as far west as the Humber River. Atkins employed the military to push the Mississaugas west to Etobicoke River, but were unable to complete their survey. So 1798, John Johnson gives a shady account of the negotiations, claiming that the sale encompassed 10 square miles in Toronto, 2 to 4 miles on either side of the road, leading to Lake Simcoe, and 10 square miles near Lake Simcoe. In 1805, under extreme pressures due to food insecurity, the Mississaugas met with the Crown to negotiate Treaty 13A, which serves to connect the boundaries of the original Toronto purchase. The Mississaugas of the New Credit received 10 shillings, or equal to $60 today, for the sale of Toronto. So obviously, you know, if you're talking to children, you could say to them, do you think that the whole of Toronto is worth $60? What do you think about that? And you will find that children are very motivated by justice. I'm sure if you have your own children at home, you've heard them say it's not fair about 6 billion times since the beginning of COVID-19. So when that conversation comes up, I assure that children will be engaged in talking about this idea. In 1923, the lands connecting the eastern border of Toronto Purchase to the Bay of Quinte were ceded in the undocumented gunshot treaty, which allegedly covers the land as far as gunshots could be heard from the shores of Lake Ontario. What a bizarre idea to sell your land based on the sound of a gunshot. 1986, the Mississaugas of the New Credit won a land claim settlement of $146 million after suing the government for the illegitimate Toronto Purchase. So this means that each band member received $20,000. Now, even with that victory that the Mississaugas of the New Credit received, what do y'all think? You can say in the chat, what do y'all think about getting $20,000 for your ancestral lands? Each person. In this world today, can $20,000 buy a house? Not in Toronto. I don't know where, but not in Toronto. So that is also something that we talk about with the children. And in 2015, this is ongoing, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation filed a claim regarding the Rouge River Valley, their traditional lands, which were unbeknownst to them, absorbed into the Williams Treaty. And this claim has not yet been resolved. There are so many unresolved land claims being launched by Indigenous peoples. And these are something that we talk to openly with the children, what treaties we are under, how these lands were acquired. People are using words in the chat such as totally inadequate, robbed, degrading, and ridiculous. And these are definitely concepts that children can understand. So we are going to go on to the next slide here, which is talking about our current realities, which we just mentioned. These realities of colonialism are not realities of the past. They are things that are ongoing. So often when we have a conversation about police brutality, when this comes up, there's this argument that police brutality is a much worse problem in the United States. So the United States, we know the statistics probably by this point. Black people are shot by police in the United States every 8 to 24 hours. And for that reason, it is beyond bizarre to use the United States as a moral compass to understand whether police brutality is a problem here or not. And to speak to that, Canada has a dire problem with police brutality that have been documented by and resisted by Black communities since community policing began in Canada. In the 1990s, Black Action Defense Committee protested a string of murders of Black people by police. And as part of the movement for Black Lives Now, Black communities in Canada have protested the murders of Jermaine Carby, Abdiraham Abdi, Boni Jean-Pierre, Kwasi Skene-Peters, Andrew Loku, Mark Ekamba Boekwa, and most recently, Regis Korchinski Paquette. Police brutality in Canada has devastated Black communities through murdering Black people and through constant surveillance and harassment of Black people. That leads to over-incarceration and mental health problems within our communities. But this image here, I've chosen it for a very specific reason, which is the fact that every day when our children are going out into the world, they're receiving messages about the value of Black life. If they ever hear the news and they hear about what happens to Black people, including Black children, those are messages that they are receiving constantly, and they need to be interrupted by this idea of their power. So this is an image of Black communities shutting down the Allen Expressway in a protest against the police murder of Andrew Loku. And as part of this protest, the highway was blocked until Mayor John Tory phoned us as we were standing on the highway. And he actually spoke to Jermaine Carby's cousin. Jermaine Carby was killed by Peel Police. And John Tory, as we were standing on the highway, phoned us and spoke to Jermaine Carby's cousin for the first time about her cousin's murder. And that happened because of this protest. So this is an image to show that Black communities coming together and resisting is powerful. It is in fact the one thing that has created all of the change that we benefit from for our communities. There is nothing aside from social activism that has played as big of a role in changing realities for Black people in Canada. So it is very important that our children see these images. It is very important that they participate in these moments when it's safe and when they can. So we're gonna go on here to the next one. So deconstructing the myth of the Free North intersectionality. It is clear that the processes of enslavement and incarceration in Canada have created disparity and suffering for many Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Canada. For people living intersectional oppressions, there is a myriad of challenges. This is especially true for Black people who live with disabilities, who are incarcerated, who practice sex work, who are transgender, queer, who are Muslim, who live in low-income neighborhoods, etc. So whenever we have these conversations about Black experience, whenever we have these conversations about Black resistance, it is so important that we talk about the intersectional experiences. I've heard it said before that when we take care of the needs of the most marginalized, everybody will have what they need. One simple example of that concept is the rounded sides of the sidewalks. What do you call it? Yeah, the rounded sides of the sidewalk. So those were created for people who are wheelchair users. However, they make life easier for if you have a stroller. They make life easier if you're riding a bicycle. But when we address the needs of the most vulnerable, it is actually beneficial for everybody. And somebody's asking, yes, inclusive design, or sometimes is referred to as universal design, right? And somebody's asking if we could define intersectional. So an intersectional experience is basically referring to this concept that I'm a Black person, but I'm not only a Black person, I'm a Black transgender person, I'm a Black queer person, I'm a parent, what else? I'm relatively able-bodied, I am so many more things. And all of those things is like, if you are Black plus queer, you don't have 1+1 oppression. Those two things fuse together to create a very particular experience of amplified oppressions. because now if I'm inside of a queer space, I will deal with racism. If I'm inside of a Black space, I will deal with homophobia. If I'm in a side of a white space, I will deal with both intersectionally, probably. So it's important to understand those intersectional experiences. And in this photo, it's a photo of Mocha Dawkins. Shout out Mocha Dawkins. And we'll talk a little bit more about the story of Mocha Dawkins as we move on. But thank you for asking questions, y'all, in the chat. Okay, so the myth of the Free North, part 5, incarceration. Does Canada have an incarceration problem when it comes to Black people? What do y'all think? Please answer inside of the chat. As I'm very curious. Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. So there is actually an institution in Ontario that is affectionately referred to as Little Jamaica by its residents, and that institution is Kingston Penitentiary. When you enter Kingston Penitentiary, you would not know that the Black population of Canada is 2%, because the inside of that institution is not 2% Black people. It is a huge overrepresentation of Black people incarcerated. And currently, Black women are statistically the fastest rising prison population in Canada. So yes, Canada has a big problem with incarceration when it comes to Black people. Additionally, we have immigration detention in Canada, which I'm sure y'all have heard all about immigration detention and ICE in the United States and the issues there, but I don't know why here, again, we don't hear about it. In the United States, there's actually a time cap for how long you're supposed to be able to spend in immigration detention. Whereas in Canada, you can spend an infinite time in an immigration detention. And between April 2019 and March 2020, Canada Border Services Agency put 8,000 people, including 138 minors, behind bars under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Among them, for instance, were asylum seekers who did not have the necessary identification papers or to be deported. So you could be in immigration detention simply because I'm supposed to be deported back to Somalia. In Somalia, there's no papers with my name on it, or the government cannot produce any papers. So therefore, I'm stuck in detention. I can't be deported. I can't stay here. Those are the type of scenarios that lead to people being in immigration detention in this country. And when we think about what are supposed to be the values of this country, that is just ludicrous. I don't believe in incarceration and detention for any reason. However, I think almost any people in Canada could agree that being incarcerated when you have not committed what's even referred to as a crime is very extreme, and is a very extreme example of anti-Black racism and the intersections of migration and racism, right? So there's many people have written about their experiences in immigration detention. Here, it's important that we highlight them. It's important that we pay attention to the voices and that we participate in the resistance by people who are speaking out. Okay. And actually, there has been a lot of resistance, especially since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, of people who have been demanding the freedom of all people who are in immigration detention for safety under COVID-19. And that campaign has been, in many cases, very successful. So, power again to the people's resistance. Okay, we're gonna go to the next one here. Soka and stretch, Soka. So we're gonna try to, before we just make it fun, there's a comment here in the chat. A few years ago, the Ontario Child Advocacy wrote a report recommending Children's Aid Society no longer allow children who are apprehended to be housed in group homes and youth correctional centers. Incarceration covers more than those in conflict with the law. Absolutely. And we haven't even really started talking about the apprehension of children. The apprehension of Black children. Black children are very highly overrepresented in Children's Aid Society cases, very highly overrepresented in foster care and in cases of apprehension. And that is very connected to these histories that we were talking about before, about residential schools, about assimilating, forced assimilation. This idea that that the state has to police and intervene into the parenting of Indigenous and Black people. That notion is very much alive today. And that's why like Neuda is doing the work that they're doing, supporting our communities with foster care, because foster care is another way that the state continues to intervene in our family, and another way that colonization continues to happen. Good night, friends. Thank you, Leroy, Auntie News, and others. Okay, so obviously we are rolling up on bedtime. So if you do have to leave the conversation, we understand. However, we are going to try to, thank you for your comment, Brianna. We are going to try to stretch for a minute here, because these conversations are very necessary, and they're very heavy. So probably we need an opportunity to just get up, move around a little bit. I see Simone Peters on here, who is a who is a very brilliant educator, very brilliant Black educator. So Simone, are you here for real? Are you ready to lead the soca and stretch? I don't know if she is. Okay. What we can do is, Ian, can you click on the next thing here? I'm just gonna see if we might want to move up and back. Okay. So what do y'all, okay. So what we will maybe do is we will start this Jeopardy game, and then I will see when Simone gets ready for this soca business. Okay, so this is a Jeopardy game. It's supposed to consolidate our knowledge, y'all. When we introduce these concepts to children and adults, it's important that we have an opportunity to consolidate and that we recapitulate what we did. So can we click on that? Okay, play now. How many teams? Doesn't matter, 2. Do you want buzzer mode? No, we didn't pay for that. No. We want pineapples and potatoes. Yay. Start. Okay, so if you, Ian, what schools do we have here? Ian.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, not sure exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, Blake, Leslieville, people are shouting out their schools.
There you go. Perfect.
Earl Grey, Leslieville.
Yeah.
Okay, Leslieville, come on, calm down. You've been named. And Pape. Okay, so if you are from Blake, Leslieville, or East, you will be a pineapple. If you are from Pape and Earl Grey, you will be a potato. I promise not to use these labels to oppress you systematically. And Rose Avenue is here too. You will be a potato as well. Okay, so when anybody earns points for their team, if you wrote the correct answer and I name you as the correct answer, you will get a point for your team. Well, maybe you'll get $100, maybe you'll get $500, y'all. It's Jeopardy. Okay, so we'll do a couple questions here and then we'll get to stretching, because now we know Simone has confirmed that they're ready too. So let's Who wants to answer a Jeopardy question? Write me. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, Kitty's team. What school are you from, Kitty? Pape. Okay. I forgot. Do you know if you're a pineapple or potato? Potato. Okay. So Pape, what category would you like? There's enslavement, colonization, police brutality, or intersectionality. We're gonna test our knowledge here on these learnings. Policing. Policing for how much money? How confident are you? 300. Policing for 300. Why were school resource officers removed from Toronto District School Board in 2017? Kitty, do you know? I'm sorry that this is a little unfair, to be honest, because we didn't really have this conversation, but we can extrapolate from the things we did discuss. Let's give Kitty a moment to know. Does that mean you're not sure? I don't know. Okay, let's help out Kitty. This is teamwork, y'all. Why do you think school resource officers would be removed from the Toronto District School Board? Funding cuts, those are popular with the Ford government. However, no, it wasn't that. Black advocacy, people fought back against it. So yes, Valerie, and also Kelly, and also Duana, you all get $300 of Jeopardy money. I'm sorry, y'all, I can't give you $300. But yes, all of those reasons, protests from the community members for over 10 years led to the eventual removal of school resource officers from the Toronto District School Board in 2017. Black community protested the SRO program because it unfairly targeted Black students and schools in Black communities. All right, amazing resistance. Oh my goodness. Go back, yes. The whole system is broken, y'all.
Let's stretch.
Okay.
All right, do you want, I can restart it. Do you want me to restart it? Sorry.
Oh, we can, let's just see. What time is this starting? Simone, are you ready now?
We're back on, we're back on.
Okay.
I haven't used this tool before. It's
I know, it's
Cool.
brand new.
Pretty
cool. Okay. I'm gonna do one more question and then I'm gonna see if Simone is ready. So who would like to answer question numero 2? Brent, good. Okay, Brent, what category would you like? Enslavement. Okay, let's, for how much money would you like to wager? 100, okay, $100. What year was slavery abolished in Canadian law? $1837. Let's see if Brent is correct. Let's click on that.
Sorry, how do I, oh, see the answer?
Yeah, see the answer. 1833. Although for anybody who put a later date, I would say you're all correct as well, because as you probably know, enslavement was abolished under the law. However, there had to be continuing legal cases against people who continued to actually practice enslavement, despite the fact that it was technically illegal. So that date and the subsequent later dates, you all get 100 Jeopardy dollars. Okay, so what we would need to do is, Ian, may you please unmute Simone? Simone is unable to unmute herself. And may you please share hosting privileges with Simone Peters. Can our school council reps get this Jeopardy web link? Yes, Grace, you may. We will share this, we will share this whole presentation with y'all.
Leroy, am I good to start?
Yeah, okay. Are you able to share your screen now?
It's just gonna be the music. So
Okay.
you're just following me. I just freestyled, so we're all good.
Okay. I'm personally gonna get up out my chair.
You better. Okay. Is everyone ready? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Tell me if you can hear the music. Can you hear it? Okay. So hello everyone. We're just swaying from side to side. Can you see me? We take one arm and bring it across.
She from I don't know. She wears and go low. The place like a
And the
don't
next arm.
So will you say, will you say, will you say? Pretty girl, will you come my way? What you do, what you do, what you do? I must get through.
And then deep breathing.
You show me that wine. Turn around, girl, don't be shy.
And exhale as you go down.
Hello, hello, hello. Yeah.
Again.
So girl, I love how the way you blow my mind. Hold me tight and bring down wine. Hello, 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 hello.
With one arm and put it behind your back. And down.
Are you ready for it? Are you ready? Are you ready for it? Give me that. Hold up. Wind it up. Right there.
Now we're gonna switch arms.
Roll on, just come to me. I'll give you that sweet type of love. Sweet type of love. Come give me that sweet type of love. Real type of love.
And now you're gonna give yourself a hug.
All night we jamming. Yeah. See, she's sweet
And we're
like a
gonna sway.
mango. She play the thing like a banjo. Them other girl them don't know how she rap the thing like a go-go.
Okay, now spread out your legs and you're gonna stretch and touch one toe, one foot.
What you do, what you do, what you do? I must get through. Girl, roll up now, you show me that wine. Turn around, girl, don't be shy. Hello, hello.
And then now the other leg.
Yeah, so girl, I love how the way you blow my mind. Hold me tight and bring down wine. Hello, 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 hello. Lord,
Now you're gonna stretch in front of you. Touch the floor.
ready for it? Are you ready? Are you ready for it? So I'll give it up.
Now slowly come up.
Right there. Front to the back. No long chat, just come to me.
Now you're gonna push one wall. Just come to push your wall.
Sweet type of love. Come give me that sweet type of love. Real type of love. Hold me tight.
One, give yourself one more hug. And we're gonna push the other wall.
Hello, 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 hello.
We're gonna do a last bit of deep breathing.
Hello, hello, hello,
Inhale.
hello. Yeah.
And then exhale. Okay, that's it.
Yay! Thank you for that exemplary pedagogy. Okay. Okay. So why don't we? Yeah. So Jeopardy. I can't really say who won for the potatoes or the pineapples, but we all won because we gathered knowledge, and we'll share this presentation with you so you can explore that more. I'm sorry to cut my time short. Okay, no problem. Yay, Soka stretch. Okay, so let's click forward one more time here. Okay, so we're gonna, in a moment, go into some smaller and more intimate spaces so that we can get to know each other a little bit more. We're gonna use a tool called the group bingo card. And this bingo card will get us started on conversations about our comfort levels with talking about racism with our kids. And what we will be wanting to do is affirm practices where we are honest with kids about history and power dynamics, and to normalize talking about white privilege, especially for the white parents. Remember that talking about racism has to be age appropriate for kids because their experiences happen at every age. So we cannot just say, okay, we're gonna be colorblind, everybody will be the same. And that way of protecting our children will not work because the world has these real experiences of racism. So the more that people could understand and deconstruct them, the less they will actually internalize this as a problem about themselves. So we will encourage those honest conversations. And this bingo card will be squares with certain experiences on them. And our group will have to talk together to find out who has done the experience. So y'all know probably when you were like in around grade 4, maybe you may have played a game where there's all these different experiences on a card. Like I have glasses, I love Harry Potter. And then you have to write somebody's name from the group in each square. And then you have to fill up the card. And when you fill up the card, you're done. So usually you go with your own individual card to each person. This time we're gonna have one card for the group. And we will, within the group, you'll have to find somebody who's done the experience. Then we will listen to that participant talk about that experience. So let's say if one of the squares on the card says, I have talked to my child about enslavement in Canada. So let's say Janine, I just made that up, has done this. We will all ask Janine to describe that experience so that we could learn from Janine. Okay, so may you please go to the next one? Thank you. So here's the bingo card. You're gonna get to go with one of the really amazing facilitators from Freedom School Toronto's team. We have Simone with us here, as well as Key and Emmanuel. And so you'll get to go with one of them and play this bingo game. So hopefully they will be able to share their screen with you if everything goes according to plan. So now, may you please, Ian, may you please make me a host so that I could put the people into a breakout room? I right now don't see the feature yet, but there we go. Okay, so breakout rooms, manually. No, that's too many breakout rooms. Okay, so Neuda, do you want to, if Ian backs up to the Jeopardy, do you want to do one more Jeopardy question while I
Sure.
do this? Okay. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No, we're not able to hear you. I'm not sure if you're.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just saying, who would like to answer a question? Put your name or save me in the chat. Okay, Jeanette. And let me know what category, which category? Intersectionality, nice. For 300, let's do it. Okay, so I have to move my screen. Who is Beverly Bram and why did Black Lives Matter protest for deportation. Does anybody know the story? Or Jeanette, do you know? No, she wasn't trans. That's right. She was pregnant and high risk, and they were attempting to deport her. Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let's click on it and see what the answer is. Ian, are you able to click answer or see answer? Yeah. So Beverly Blam is a Black woman who migrated from Jamaica to Canada. She was deported by the Canadian government while 8 months pregnant, so very close to the end of her term. And Black Lives Matter fought for Beverly's right to stay in Canada since her husband and child are Canadian. Okay, so that's 300 points. Okay, who would like to go next? Evedne? Sure. Okay, let's go. What category would you like? Colonization. For how much? 100. Okay. What is the dish with one spoon treaty? Let's see. An agreement to peaceably share the Great Lakes region between many First Nations, 16th Treaty, agreement between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee to share land. Okay, so let's have a look at the answer, please. So this was a treaty made between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee at Montreal in 1701. It's a treaty that describes how nations can share land peacefully in Ontario. So you guys got that right. Very nice.
Okay.
Are you ready, Leroy?
It's a good time. Okay, so hopefully if y'all's children are in e-learning, you big up their teachers every day, because I will tell you that that breakout room creation was very too real. Okay, so in a moment, I'll click open all rooms. With any luck, you will end up in a room with your peers and a facilitator. And all the facilitators have this bingo card, so they could help you out with getting to know each other. So let's open the rooms. You will have to click on join. Okay, sorry if that was very abrupt time travel experience. Okay, so hopefully in your group you are having a cool conversation about how you talk about these different issues with your kids. So do you mind clicking on to the next thing here? Okay, so
Sorry.
yeah, in our group we had a lot of different like expertise and experiences of people talking to their kids, so that was a cool skill share. We are gonna normally, like, whenever we do programming, we have a closing circle and we talk together about what we learned and our favorite moments and what was tough. Because of the size of our group, it's kind of challenging for us to do a circle like that. So, instead of that, we provided this form, Google form. So if you click on it, you can give some self-reflections about how the session was for you. And we will also stick around if you have some different questions or comments that you want to say or ask. Thank you to our excellent breakout room facilitators.
Leroy,
Yeah.
honestly, we had some deep conversations that we didn't even get to that. It was like really, really good. And I feel so bad because they have no idea what the questions are.
You had to, okay, so you didn't go to the bingo card.
No, because
Okay.
our conversations were so rich. And I was like, oh my God. And then I see 17 seconds. I'm like, oh my God.
Okay, to be honest, it's so soft. Those bingo cards was just a way to get us talking. So if y'all are having interesting conversations that related to this, then don't worry, it's totally
Okay.
and it's totally fine if you have no idea what I'm talking about the bingo card. So yeah, I know also some other groups had difficulty screen sharing, so they kind of just talked about the bingo card scenarios anecdotally, and that's also totally fine. So yeah, if you, I think maybe we have to copy paste this link into the chat.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Doo-doo-doo. Can do that. Okay, so now I put the link in the chat. A lot of people did. Preview, okay, we could preview. Yes, so the link's in the chat. Now, if you want to click on the link and you want to fill out our Google form, we would really appreciate it so that we can know what works for people about this workshop and what's less useful. So Ian, could you click on to the next one, please? Oh, yay. So, oh, boo, yay. Okay, so staying connected, just before I preview the next session, please stay connected with Freedom School Toronto. You can check out our website, freedomschooltoronto.ca. Please, we have programming if you're interested in getting your kids involved. If you would like to have us come speak at your school, we would love to do that. We talk about things like this with parent councils. We also talk to kids about uplifting Blackness within the school community. We always need volunteers. Yay, Lindsay White said our programming is the best. Thank you, Lindsay. We have, okay, so yeah, we have different programs teaching about Black liberation, self-love for Black students, and histories of resistance. And we are hoping to develop like a little kit to help non-Black parents talk to their kids about race and racism. So keep an eye out for that. So let's preview. So I won't preview all the slides because then you won't come to the session. But next session, we are going to really talk about how do we make this information that we discussed today, how do we package it for kids so that they can understand, they can relate to it, they can engage, and most importantly, that we do not ignite trauma through these conversations. These conversations, though very important, can ignite trauma for Black and Indigenous kids. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how do we get this on their level. Any other comments, questions? Cool. Oh, I see. What a great start. Thank you. Andrea, did you have a question? Oh. Will you? Okay, so there's. Go ahead, Andrea.
Can we get a copy of your presentation, and is it possible to share it with Peak School?
Yes, you may get a copy of the presentation. And you can share it with your school, and you can also encourage your school if they would like to do any work around anti-Black racism. When we work with schools, we work with the school individually. So when we did a lot of work with, for example, Rose Avenue, where we got to meet Simone, whoop, whoop. And when we do that, we talk with the Black students and the Black parents to get an understanding of what anti-Blackness looks like specifically in the school site. So only after that can we help to support developing a plan to address it, because it has to be community specific. So we're going to be doing the same thing in the affinity group for y'all's schools. And then based on that feedback, it will help guide us to create more sessions. So we would love to come and do that. And also you can share the presentation. I'll copy the link before I get off of here. And
yeah, I would love to just know how I can get in touch with you to connect you with the school.
Yay. Okay. So I'm going to put our email again here. Okay. And then I'll also copy the link for the presentation. Oh, now please don't look at part 2, guys. Okay, and somebody said, will we be addressing internalized racism? So not directly. What we will be talking about is how when you don't address like racism directly, it leads to a lot of internalized issues. So for example, there are people who say talking about race and racism is not appropriate for younger kids. I would only start talking to for example, somebody might say, I would only start talking to my kids about race when they're a teenager, something like that. That is what actually leads to a lot of internalizing of negative emotions and issues, because you don't understand what's happening. If you go to school all the time and it's like all the different teachers are treating you a certain way, you might think that it's because of something that you're doing or something bad about you. So our kind of way of addressing internalized racism will really be about really pushing for honest and open conversations. That's what it will be about. That sounds really great and hands-on. So somebody said that we have to have permission to share the presentation. So what I have to do, I just clicked on change permission to anyone with link. So now you should see.